Sunday, September 15, 2024. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we make the time to consider the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5minute news. Today we continue our series of conversations with forensic and social psychiatrist and world expert on violence, Dr Bandy Lee. Welcome back to the Weekend Show.
Hello.
Now, you must have been watching Tuesday's ABC News presidential debate as much as not just me, but tens of millions of others were across the country. This was a bit of a reckoning, really, as there are no other scheduled debates for the presidential election. ABC News got to do this. They agreed the plans with both parties. Donald Trump won the coin toss. He got to do the closing statement. Kamala Harris chose to be in the right-hand podium position, and it actually played out surprisingly better than I was fearing. Maybe it's just me, but I was terrified that it was going to be a car crash, and it wasn't. It was, however, an expose on a Donald Trump that we don't normally see. I wasn't getting rally Donald Trump, and I wasn't getting interview Donald Trump. I was getting another version of this man with a personality disorder, malignant narcissism, as you describe. Just firstly, tell us about the man that you saw on that podium on Tuesday night.
Well, for the first time, we saw a Donald Trump who should have been revealed from the very beginning and treated the way he should have been, which is the way that mental health professionals normally deal with such individuals. From the very beginning, I have said that Donald Trump should not be engaged in a debate because it normalizes him and it sanitizes him. But Kamala Harris, one advantage I felt, a very strong advantage, and it's far more significant than most people may realize, is her background as a prosecutor, dealing with these disordered personalities and constantly consulting with mental health experts. We are usually the ones who redirect prosecutors, judges, other lawyers to recognizing that the most dangerous personalities are often the most deceptive. They're called, it's called a mask of sanity for a reason, to borrow Hervey Cleckley's terminology. He was someone who described psychopathy. Psychopathy is perhaps even a better description than malignant narcissism, because psychopathy is really the scale that has been developed over time and what we watch out for in dangerous personalities. It measures the degree of dangerousness. And it's a very deceptive impairment whereby people would mistake them for the most compassionate, likable, charming, and even ideal figure for the role or for the relationship than anyone who is normal. But of course, it is a mask, and it covers up a far more pernicious and harmful intent as well as tendency. And so that is, so normally we don't encounter these personalities. They are largely present in criminal justice settings or in state hospitals, more so now, but increasingly they've infiltrated leadership positions. And it's a very dangerous phenomenon because once they take the positions of power, they're not interested in doing the job. They're interested in the power, which is, in their view, at their disposal to abuse. And then they end up destroying and damaging whatever institution, corporation, or country they're in charge of. So Kamala Harris's obviously familiar with this personality. There were lots of techniques that came out which make obvious that she probably consulted with mental health experts or just from her experience of working with them, as well as her personal experience of developing skills and boundaries and limit setting that are necessary for such individuals. It's not as easy as it seems, which is why no one else has succeeded at it, and why I have continued to say that it would take mental health experts to handle this. And fortunately, Kamala Harris has come quite close.
That was the biggest surprise, was that she seemed to be in total control. And last week we spoke about being mentally healthy versus being mentally ill, and how she displays mental health, a positive. And that was for me because, there was a white line between the two of them as they were presented on the screen. It was like Exhibit A and Exhibit B, and it's like, this is what happens if you don't look after your mental health, and this is what happens if you do look after your mental health. He really exhibited many signs of being very seriously and deeply emotionally compromised.
Absolutely. But in order to display that health, just about anyone who's debated Donald Trump has been healthy. But in order to display that health, she had to overcome his dominance, his threats and intimidation, his ability to take over the narrative and the scene. She had to become dominant herself. And you could see from the very first moment when she walked straight across the center of stage, she surprised him with a handshake and was very friendly, overwhelmingly friendly.
Because she's never met him before. I didn't realize that, but they've never had any contact previously. I mean, that was a stroke of genius to march over into his domain, because she eventually met up with him behind his podium. He was walking much slower.
Deliberate.
That was deliberate. Interesting.
Quite deliberate on her part. And it takes a deep understanding of his psychology in order to be able to know that that is what is needed. And that is why the deeper the understanding of the problem of Donald Trump, which is a mental health problem, the more effective we would be at countering what he has manifested and spread. That's the reason why I have said from the very beginning of his presidency how critical mental health education was and continues to be, because that will allow us to find solutions, to intervene in ways that are appropriate, and to respond to him in ways that will be effective. That is the benefit of knowledge and expertise.
There's so many games that he was playing with her during it, like trying, as you said, trying to exert his authority. Do you think, even at the very beginning, do you think he was purposely walking extremely slowly onto the stage? I mean, I appreciate that he didn't have far to go, but it was almost like he was trying to dominate by just being, it was like a John Wayne to get to the podium.
I think he was trying to remain calm and composed. In the beginning, he presented that way, but it quickly fell apart because he was not able to buttress that with any true emotional stability or composure. And he quickly showed himself for who he is. And also, being someone who is impaired, he cannot quickly adjust or change his method. He remains rigid. He had one method of countering reality, which is normally quite effective. But once we figure out how he operates, then it becomes his liability.
She is clearly highly intelligent, and you have to be in order to navigate somebody like him. And also when you're on a podium and it's very hard, there's no audience, you really do feel very isolated in that environment. To be able to think clearly without the distraction of that type of a man dominating. I was very impressed with that ability. Yes, she has knowledge.
Yes, she has knowledge of these individuals and their psychological structure, so that she does not get wrapped up in their way of thinking or their way of responding. She actually rises above and far above. You know, Michelle Obama said, when they go low, we go high, but I've actually said we need to go even higher, because it goes beyond what ordinary etiquette or ordinary social skills can handle. It requires some expert knowledge and experience. She's clearly experienced.
Well, she said, I know his type, didn't she? When she was talking about being a prosecutor, she's like, I know Donald Trump's type. She'd said that in a previous event. And,
yes,
you know, that wasn't bluster. I mean, that was absolutely clear that she does know his type, and therefore she knew how to really goad him and get at him. But she did it in a way, as I was seeing, because I always want people to go low. You know, I'm very much of the opinion that it's like, be explicit. But she didn't. She remained very classy, and she didn't stoop. And I think that was her power.
Yes, actually, those who deal with such personalities are, in fact, quite firm and quite severe at times. But it is not because they're stooping to their level, but because they know whom they're dealing with and what is required to contain their behavior. Because a lot of their behavior actually needs to be managed. A lot of what mental health experts or forensic mental health experts, those who work in criminal justice settings or at the interface of psychiatry and the law, we're constantly managing behavior because they cannot do it themselves. In fact, going along with their demands or giving them infinite leeway, which is what they demand, is actually the exact opposite of how we should be treating them. In fact, Donald Trump himself became as dangerous as he had become because he was given the power of the presidency that he should never have been given. He's too impaired. That is what unfitness means, that he cannot handle that level of power. It has only made him more miserable and more disillusioned with what is not possible because his fantasies would never meet reality, and all the more dangerous.
I got the impression that the expose of his unfitness by nature of the split screen was very helpful to undecided voters or independent voters, people who hadn't yet maybe made up their minds. I mean, I'd like to think most people already have, but there's always people that can be swayed, and we've spoken about this previously. He was at many points saying things that weren't just untrue, they were outrageous. And maybe we could look at a few of those, and maybe we should start on the abortion subject because it's so important. That, you know, he kept reiterating that Democrats kill babies after they are born. And in fact, the moderator had to step in and say it is illegal to kill babies in all 50 states. How is it that something as outrageous and clearly false as that can be said out loud, and he repeated it several times, by a former president and somebody who is running for president, and expect to be taken seriously? Is it that he just doesn't have any respect for the people that support him and think they'll just lap up at anything that he says? Or is there something else to this? It seemed quite sinister.
Well, he himself is driven by a dark psychology. What Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung called the shadow. And it's highly emotionally driven. So not only does he conjure up the most horrific images and dark displays of what he sees to be reality, the chaos and carnage of in society that doesn't really exist, but he takes others with him to that place. And I heard early on that he says the unspoken out loud, that, he says what others only think. That only goes to a certain degree, but he's actually leading people into those domains. And that's part of the Trump contagion that I've been warning against and wrote in my latest book, The Psychology of Trump Contagion, that he's spreading not just ideas, but a whole mindset and a whole psychology that once people assume it, they come to think like he does. They rather follow whatever he says, and then reality goes by the wayside because he subverts reality into delusion, and his own delusions into reality. That is what severe symptoms cause one to do. And the level of detachment from reality indicates how severe his symptoms are. So that's one of the reasons why he's able to be completely untethered from reality. He's able to, what he's describing is feeling. The killing of babies, the eating cats and dogs, that kind of imagery, vermin, bloodbaths.
It's a hellscape. He's describing his own hellscape.
That's right. And his own distress, because those who are mentally unwell inevitably suffer, even if they project the reason for that suffering onto others and explain in all kinds of ways to make their own situation palatable to them. It's called egosyntonic, meaning it doesn't bother the self, but it bothers others.
Because that rhetoric about killing babies, I mean, I feel very uncomfortable even saying it myself, but that is the language of the MAGA Republican Party. That is what they kind of jumped on. And I think it was because of one case of a failed pregnancy. And so they rewrote the story of that and have been regurgitating it in a way that claims that, and firstly, Democrats are not doctors. So there's no Democrats killing babies. And so the language has become diluted over time so that it's really just like 3 or 4 quite explicit words that don't really make any sense. And so there's no desire to go to the origins of the story, to debunk. And that's what I would have preferred Kamala Harris to have done in that moment. But she actually did very well on this subject. She's very well versed in it. And she was able to talk about people. And this is something that he could not connect with. She talked about how a woman who needs to seek an abortion has to cross state lines. She has to travel. She has to get on a plane. She has to sit next to strangers. She's in distress. She's emotionally compromised, and he just couldn't go there. And it was very important for her to tell that story, wasn't it?
Yes, she knows exactly the kinds of things that will help her connect with the American public that he himself cannot understand and he himself cannot take part in. Usually, we don't diagnose public figures, and I've told you I hadn't diagnosed Donald Trump, but actually we did do a dangerousness risk assessment on him as a public service to submit as a pre-sentencing report to Manhattan Criminal Court Justice Juan Merchan. And part of doing a dangerousness assessment involves measuring on a scale of psychopathy, the degree of psychopathy. Now, mental health in general has used multiple different categories and scales, but I think one useful one is a scale of psychopathy, going from the scale itself is measured from 0 to 40. Very few people are 0 and very few people are 40, but it is a spectrum whereby the more psychopathic traits one has, the more disconnected from reality one will be and more dangerous. That's why it's actually a wildly useful scale. Ever since Dr. Robert Hare in Canada developed it in the 1990s, it's been widely distributed and studied to the point where it's probably one of the most rigorous diagnoses we can make. But it's a diagnosis that does not depend on a personal interview and does not depend on getting the person's consent, because it's actually a measure for keeping others safe. It's a dangerousness scale. So we did that scale, and I wouldn't state the score until the sentencing actually happens, because as an etiquette, we haven't really revealed it publicly.
And since we spoke last week, the sentencing has now been delayed.
That's right.
Until after the election.
Yes.
And that, I mean, how did you feel about that? I was I was a little upset, to say the least, because Tanya Chutkan's court doesn't seem to care for the fact that he's a presidential candidate, but Juan Mercan did and does, and therefore made the delay because he was like, it's too complex to schedule this and it's inappropriate to do it with the election. And I felt like that was a bit of a cop-out, really.
Well, yes, he did the exact opposite of what Judge Tanya Chutkan did, and we were, of course, disappointed because it wouldn't be the first time he delayed it. The initial sentencing date was July 11th, and that's why we rushed our pre-sentencing report for the middle of June so that he would have ample time to review it. And so I would note that the most eminent psychiatrists in the country joined in doing that report. That's why because we considered a rigorous dangerousness assessment to be critical for the public to know about, and for the judge especially to take into consideration to protect the public. So it was delayed once to September 18th when the Supreme Court came out with its decision to give presidential acts absolute immunity. So everything had to be reinterpreted. But now it's been delayed again, surprisingly, because of the election. So rather than Judge Chutkan, who decided that politics should not play a role in legal proceedings, in this case, politics is exactly what caused the delay. But at the same time, he's been under a lot of pressure because judges oftentimes, particularly when they are highly professional and firm against violent offenders, can get a lot of accusations and attacks. And in this case, the attacks were coming from a very powerful figure, as well as some institutions. So I don't blame him, but it does place the electorate in a great deal of uncertainty and unsafety in our view. So actually, because we're planning this major conference on fitness and leadership at the National Press Club on September 27th, we have debated as to whether or not we should make this report public. There is a good possibility now that we may, because our primary responsibility to warn the public and alert it about potential victimization is an independent responsibility that we have as part of our responsibility to society, apart from any legal process or sentencing. We, as mental health experts, have the obligation. It's an obligation that has been muted during the Trump era. And in fact, I've stated a number of times how the American Psychiatric Association went against its own science, its scholarship, and its own ethicists in the field to state that we have no societal responsibility, even in a national emergency. That alarming statement is what caused me in 2017 to organize my conference at Yale School of Medicine to discuss this sudden, seemingly irrational and dangerous decision on the part of the American Psychiatric Association.
And we know the ramifications of that now. The ramifications of that now is that you've almost had to go it alone by setting up this conference and bringing expertise together. What you're effectively saying is that we don't need the association's support to speak the truth, to do our civic duty, because his dangerousness level clearly, he was using Viktor Orban throughout the debate as an example of somebody who endorses him and his actions and his behavior. That is a terrifying thought, that he thinks that is a good enough endorsement to be allowed to get away with these heinous acts.
And highly revelatory of his psychology.
Yes.
I was about to say that most people think of the American Psychiatric Association as some kind of national institution or licensing board, but it's not. It's actually a trade association. And not all psychiatrists belong to it. It would have been, as a premier professional association, it would have been highly helpful for them to take on the professional consensus that we had at the time that Donald Trump was dangerous. There was not a consensus as to whether or not we should speak about it publicly, but there was definitely a consensus as to his dangerousness. There was absolutely no disagreement about that. But they effectively muscled us and did so in a way that went far beyond their jurisdiction, because they basically just have authority over their own members, because what they advanced, what they call the Goldwater Rule informally, is not the law. It's not adopted by any other mental health association, and it's also not allowed on licensing boards because it conflicts with the First Amendment. And yes, as professionals, we have an independent responsibility to consider what is ethical, what is our professional role. We are not supposed to just follow the fiats of associations, and definitely not that of a government.
I want to talk about his white privilege in the next part, because I saw quite of that on display, white male privilege, in fact, and the way he was able to control the narrative. But we'll take a quick break and we'll come back and do that next here on The Weekend Show. There's a lot happening these days. It can feel especially stressful or hopeless when things are outside of your control. But calm can help you restore your sense of balance and peace amidst outside chaos. If, like me, you have trouble sleeping, or maybe you've had difficulty focusing, things like parenting pressures or work challenges, well, something that could really make a difference is Calm. Calm is the #1 app for sleep and meditation, giving you the power to calm your mind and change your life. Calm can help you learn to de-stress and fall asleep faster so you can get restful sleep every night. And Calm knows that everyone faces unique challenges in their daily lives, and mental health isn't about a one-size-fits-all solution. That's why Calm offers a wide range of content to help you navigate life's ups and downs. Stress less, sleep more, and live better with Calm. For listeners to this show, Calm is offering an exclusive offer of 40% off a Calm premium subscription at calm.com/weekend. Go to calm.com/weekend for 40% off unlimited access to Calm's entire library. That's calm.com/weekend. We're back on the Weekend Show, analysing the ABC News debate between prospective candidates for President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris. I want to talk about his white male privilege, because I did get a sense that he was able to get more airtime by nature of steamrolling when it wasn't his turn to speak. So, for example, she'd say something that he didn't like. He couldn't control himself to say nothing, as she had in at several instances. He leans in and he's like, "Excuse me, I need to answer that." And of course, his mic is off, but because he starts talking, and I presume the sound mixer is like, "Well, that's Donald Trump," they turned it on, and the camera then cuts to him, and so he was able to pull focus, to use a cinematic term. And
yes, and then when
did get more
Kamala
airtime.
Harris wished to do so, she was cut off.
Correct. So I mean, that is, I describe it as his white male privilege, because he's so used to doing this type of steamrolling and getting the attention.
Well,
how would you describe it?
There is. He will grab it and
right.
exploit it to the maximum, which he has all his life. And still it would not be enough, because it never actually takes care of the internal dearth he feels, the endless black hole that others have described his emotional state as. He's perpetually famished. So you can give him everything in the world, he would not be satisfied.
It's so interesting to me that you describe him as being, very empty and very sad, because, he's masking clearly all the time that he's in public. And I presume that's why he puffs out his chest and does this kind of, takes on a different posture that he would have in private. When I see him photographed in private, he's very slouchy and hunchbacky, and yet he changes all that when he's on show, rallies or stage or interview.
Oh, yes.
Is he very conscious of these multiple personalities where, he has to change his physicality in order to play this role?
Well, it's again the mask. It's not so much multiple personalities as his true personality and his defense, or the mask that is presenting the opposite of how he perceives himself, in order to constantly defend himself, because he believes that the world is a menacing, dangerous place where he must constantly puff himself up and defend himself and assault others before he himself is assaulted.
Some of the questions he wasn't able to answer at all. And for example, she was talking about healthcare, and he's like, well, she was like, where's your plan? And he said, I have a concept of a plan, but why should I have a plan? I'm not the president. He let slip the fact, because he's always saying, as he did at the beginning of the debate, that he felt that Donald Trump should be the president, that Joe Biden lost the election. He was still going down the election fraud avenue, which I was very surprised at, because I was like, man, 60 court cases, so much press coverage of the fact that was a free and fair election. And he's still, all these months, years later, he cannot let it lie. So he was just defaulting to that again, sowing misinformation, causing electoral chaos by nature of his accusations.
Well, he's truly aggrieved. He cannot tolerate a reality where he hasn't won the election. So he must continue to defend that delusion.
But they did point out that he'd said that he'd only lost by a whisker, and then he kind of said, I was being sarcastic or something. So, because I thought he'd dropped that narrative. I thought that over time, the notion that he wasn't the winner, he'd kind of put it to bed. So what you're saying is that he never put that to bed.
Well,
and actually
he knows
he
the
lives
reality, and at certain points he will be able to accept the reality or not. But that depends mostly on his emotional state, not any external fact. And indeed, actually, I thought that his ability to even state that he did not have a plan for healthcare was a sign that actually that's the greatest level of emotional health that I've seen in him, because otherwise he would be saying, I have the greatest plan. Yeah. Only I can fix it.
But he did say that when he was in office. He kept saying, it's coming in another 2 weeks, I'll unveil my plan. And clearly there never was one. So that is a shift, isn't it?
So I felt that could have been a shift that happened in the course of the debate, because Kamala Harris was, in fact, acting like a therapist. That's why I feel that she's quite seasoned in working not only with mental health experts, but learning a lot of the techniques and perhaps even having studied them herself. There are certain things she said. For example, she said, he's trying to again divide and distract from reality. So that's a comment on process. Most people don't think of doing that. They get carried away by the process, and that's how he wrests control of the situation. But in this case, she was pointing out and in fact neutralizing his process or manipulation of process. And so she effectively took that defense away. There was another thing she said, for example, that you're not running against Joe Biden. You're running against me.
Yes.
That very much summarized and gave him back his process. So restating whatever he was saying in terms that are quite stark and illustrate his process. So also her pointing out that from the very beginning, before anything happened, that he was going to come out with a bunch of lies. And so she referred back again and again. As I said in the beginning, I told you that he would be saying a bunch of lies, and here are the lies. So these are actually very effective techniques of limit setting, of basically managing him in ways where he will not go off in all directions. He would not be able to expand to his concept of infinite power, omnipotence, and omniscience, but rather he became more reality-based. And we saw him for who he was, partly because of what she was doing during the debate. In a sense, a debate could be seen as an extended public therapy session.
Right, that's how it felt, certainly.
Exactly. And that's why he wasn't able to muster up his usual, much of what he said was kind of rote and what he normally says, but his behavior, his demeanor, his showing his symptoms was because his defenses were being stripped away, and he was actually being brought back to reality in ways that are actually therapeutic for him.
Because he never hears this stuff, does he? I mean, that's the thing, is that he's so isolated from criticism that this was really probably one of the first times where somebody had said to his face that he was a liar, said to his face that, you're not running against Joe Biden, and said to his face that you haven't got a plan. And it's important, isn't it, to actually, give him these reality checks.
Exactly. It's grounding him back in reality because she understands him. She understands his psychological structure and she knows how to deal with it. She recognizes the processes he's bringing, even if he bulldozes her with his fire hose of lies. He is not able to topple her because she understands what is happening, and she's still in control because she not only understands but is capable of greater than what he is doing. And that only comes with training and knowledge. It's not automatic. In fact, it's quite difficult. It's one of the most difficult tasks that mental health professionals may encounter, dealing with these dangerous personalities. And the fact that she was able to do it so skillfully shows to what degree she's aware of the mental health principles, as well as probably dealt with a lot of forensic psychiatrists and psychologists, such as myself. And this is what has been needed. Otherwise, we end up feeding his symptoms, amplifying them, giving into them.
Right.
Which is what has happened for the last 9 years, because the press and the public and those with power did not deal with him for who he was, a very severely mentally impaired, symptomatic person, not a normal individual.
So when we talk about the media has given him oxygen, what you're saying is it's not just airtime, it's actually contributed to the psychopathy.
Absolutely. 100%. Because he would not be so severely impaired. He's much, much worse than he was 9 years ago, precisely because he's been given everything he's asked for. And that's exactly what you must not do with such individuals.
Well, he was given the presidency.
As it is at first, because they threaten and intimidate and become aggressive. But that's exactly when you have to set the limits and contain them, or they will become infinitely more dangerous.
Let's talk about Putin for a second, because he actually said in the debate, he said he said that that Vladimir Putin had endorsed Kamala Harris. That's right. Now, this is a tactic that the Russians used previously. When interviewed 3.5 years ago, Vladimir Putin said, "I want Joe Biden to win the election." But of course he didn't. He's a Trump puppet master. And in fact, only the other day at a Trump rally, Trump claimed that Putin hadn't endorsed Harris. And he said he didn't mean it when he said he did. And so there was this kind of misinformation, this purpose disinformation, I presume, to confuse the issue. But clearly this was put on full show. And then Harris comes back and goes, well, the reason you like Putin is because he can manipulate you. He is manipulating you. It's not the other way around. And that was very shocking for him to handle, wasn't it?
Of course. He couldn't tolerate Vladimir Putin supporting anyone else, which is why he denied it. And Putin was saying that actually to control Trump, because doing so would make Trump devastated and
clever.
Be all the more submissive toward him and lap up any hint of favor he would give him. So it's a control technique.
It's so simple, isn't it? You know, we've spoken on the show before about Putin's training as a KGB agent and psychological techniques that the Russians have used for decades. But this one seems so simple. Is it because Donald Trump is such an easy mark that Putin's able to just go, I'm supporting her, knowing that he is going to struggle with that and then talk too much?
Yes, Russians are highly sophisticated at psychological warfare, because that's what they have employed through many regimes, and they're highly known for that. Donald Trump, on the other hand, is a very, very simple person who even many of us Americans can figure out. It doesn't take a Russian KGB.
And his naivety was kind of on full display. And I was interested in his face because he doesn't have a sense of humor. He doesn't know how to tell a joke. He's not a humorous person. But when she was saying things, he was like doing this weird gurning face, which was like to imitate a smile. But he couldn't actually muster a smile.
Well, that's what his dangerous personality traits reveal, that he's not capable of many of these positive emotions, humor, compassion, love. These things are truly outside of his grasp. And that means that the only way he can express them is if they have some kind of instrumental goal. He mimics it. But most likely, especially with the psychopathy scale that we performed, he has very little capacity for it, which is quite tragic. It's the most debilitating condition known to psychiatry, because essentially you're missing all the traits that make you human. But it doesn't discount the dangers. And so they need to be contained, and they need to be kept from power positions so they don't propagate their symptoms and they don't create others who have their impairments.
Let's talk about his response to the question whether or not he wanted Ukraine to win the war with Russia, because this was very, very interesting. He refused to commit to a yes or no answer, which is what he was asked. Clearly, we all know now, because it's been exposed, his idea of fixing the war in Ukraine overnight will just be giving territory to the Russians and you know, saying that the Ukrainians just have to deal with it. But he wouldn't be drawn on that. I mean, it's so crazy, isn't it, that this former president of the United States who wants to be a future president of the United States would not advocate for the sovereignty of a nation like Ukraine and its right to defend itself. I mean, that's all we needed to hear from him, to know that he is an enemy of the state.
That's right, because he isn't interested in democracy. He's not interested in justice. He's highly allied with the strong man because he himself, well, the strong men psychology is that these are all weak men, and they display this exaggerated strength in order to dominate and deny what their true inadequacy and ineptitude. And so for Donald Trump, someone who has the defenses of Putin is far more appealing, and someone like Zelensky, for example, or a nation like Ukraine is nothing to him. In fact, he may have disdain for them for not displaying the kind of strong, militaristic, just overbearing kind of power that Russia exerts.
It's so interesting, isn't it, that the guy who wants to be president is literally on the wrong side.
Well, that's why American democracy will not survive another Trump presidency.
Yeah.
Well, we barely survived the first one because the U.S. was actually categorized as an anocracy for a while. We are no longer the longest enduring democracy. I believe Switzerland holds that position now because we were briefly a non-democracy after January 6th, I believe.
It's remarkable, isn't it, that
Yes.
he's even allowed to run for president, considering the mental health, but most importantly, his hate for the democracy that is the United States. And there is this constant denial from MAGA Republicans that we were ever a democracy. And that now is, I think, it's almost as important as the reversal of Roe when it comes to people voting. And that's why I'm hoping that people will cross party lines in order to vote for Kamala Harris just this once, because it maintains the democracy that he has no interest in.
Well, that will be our first step to restoring ourselves, because otherwise we will just continue down the death spiral. All of this is because Donald Trump has spread his symptoms in a way that has compromised the entire nation's mental health. So I've been describing in many places that democracy is what collective mental health looks like in our day. Otherwise, we would become incapable of it. So voting Democrat this time around may be voting for mental health versus mental pathology.
Let's take another quick break, but I want to come back and wrap up our analysis of the ABC News debate and just take a deeper look at some of his use of language. We'll do that next here on The Weekend Show. I've always found it difficult to find clothes that I like to wear, and when I find one thing that works, I just buy loads of them and just wear the same thing all the time. Well, men's closets were due for a radical reinvention, and Rhone stepped up to the challenge. Rhone's commuter collection is the most comfortable, breathable, and flexible set of products known to man. And here's why. Rhone helps you get ready for any occasion. The commuter collection offers the world's most comfortable pants, dress shirts, zips, and polos. You'll never have to worry about what to wear when you've got the Rhone commuter collection. The comfortable four-way stretch fabric provides breathability and flexibility that leaves you free to enjoy what life throws your way, from your commute to work or your 18 holes of golf. It's time to feel confident without the hassle. With Rhone's wrinkle release technology, wrinkles disappear as you stretch and wear the products. It's that easy. And with Gold Fusion anti-odor technology, you'll be smelling fresh and clean all day long. And on top of that, Rhone is 100% machine washable, so you can ditch the dry cleaner altogether. I personally love a technical fabric, something that is advanced and uses technology to make a more comfortable and more modern outfit. Now, the commuter collection can get you through any workday and straight into whatever comes next. So head to rhone.com/Anthony and use promo code Anthony to save 20% off your entire order. That's 20% off your entire order when you head to rhone.com/Anthony and use code Anthony, ANTHONY. It's time to find your corner office comfort. We're back on The Weekend Show with Dr. Bandy Lee. I'm Anthony Davis. So during the debate, Donald Trump kind of got to what I call his Armageddon moments, and he does this during the rallies where he talks about World War III, and he talks about nuclear weapons, and that's the reason he claimed that, Putin needs to be taken seriously because he has a nuclear arsenal. Now, this is not the language of a sane man to start using World War III as a threat for not voting for him. It's extreme. And I'm pleased he's now saying World War III and not World War II, which he said on a few occasions in rallies where he obviously, got his history wrong. But even so, it is such a level of provocation that it undoubtedly is going to make people think this guy is dangerous to have access to the nuclear codes here in the United States.
Well, that has been the reason for our coming out in public to warn for societal safety and survival from the very beginning. We were not political people. We were not interested in countering one candidate or another. What we saw was the dangers that Donald Trump brought because of his psychology, because of his mental unfitness, and the power position that he came to hold by being elected to the presidency. Many people buy into his rhetoric that he's a peaceful president, that he started no wars. But I would argue he started multiple wars by spreading his warlike mentality, because in his mind, he's constantly fighting wars. And so war is his normal state. And so alliances didn't make sense to him. Collaboration, cooperation do not even enter his vocabulary. Everything is a competition. And he started trade wars. He started threatening nations. He escalated the threat of nuclear war far before any of the wars happened during Biden's presidency. Well, we do have the very aggressive military-industrial complex that may not have considered him a reliable proponent or driver, but he certainly destabilized the world in a way that the military-industrial complex could.
And we're seeing that in Gaza as well. I mean, the effects of that in Gaza, with Iran being destabilized. Of course, he pulled the U.S. out of the Iran nuclear deal, which prevented them from enriching uranium at significant quantities. So Iran was contained previously, and now, of course, they are supplying Hamas. And so
he certainly set the stage for multiple world wars.
But that's the confidence trick, isn't it? This whole no war thing. It's like build the wall. It's very simple language that we hear it repeated by Trump supporters. No war, no war. And yet anybody with any understanding of international diplomacy and relations recognizes that there is a breadcrumb trail back to Donald Trump with many of these conflicts. Some of which he didn't even know about. I mean, I'm sure he has no interest in Sudan or Yemen, just probably has no idea that these things are going on.
And there's actually a very interesting phenomenon that happens psychologically that's I've mentioned before, that most of mental processes are unconscious. Something very interesting that happens unconsciously is that we tend to create or recreate in our external world what is happening internally. And so when we feel so much chaos and confusion, as well as aggression and trauma around him, that's actually what's going on within him. So we come to feel through his actions what he actually feels within.
Finally, the greatest example of his inner child being exposed in that debate for me was when Kamala Harris said, "I'd like you to come to one of his rallies. You'll see that he's talking about fictional characters, Hannibal Lecter, that windmills give you cancer, and that people are bored and that they are leaving early." And that destroyed him. I mean, you could see him physically shrivel as she was saying that. But it also lit him up, because that was a subject that he felt he could talk about. And it was something that was obviously far more important to him than any of the other subjects surrounding policy or public service. And so he then argued for the fact that he, again, crowd size, exactly as Barack Obama had kind of criticized him for at the DNC.
That's right. We can see what is predominantly on his mind. And when he says things that he doesn't really mean, or things that he doesn't really care for, how he actually wanted exceptions with abortion, and he felt sorry for certain groups. It comes across as very disingenuous because he doesn't connect that way. But numbers, crowd sizes, that's how his worth is measured. And so he becomes very animated in that direction. But she also did very well in pointing out exactly what he was relying on and how he operated, and the things that people could not say out loud, such as the glaring signs of his mental decline.
Could she have said that out loud? I mean, I was wanting her to reference his insanity and specifically, and his mental impairment specifically, but she didn't do that.
I felt that she was treading a fine line as to what she could say as a candidate, and but for me, I felt she said it more than anyone else. Our frustration with Joe Biden in the past was that he would not point these things out. He would explicitly avoid these topics, and but then again, this ought not to be the kind of thing that a presidential candidate needs to preoccupy themselves with. Unfortunately, that's where we are with Donald Trump.
She pointed out that she grew up in a normal middle-class family, and yet he had been given $400 million by his father and gone bankrupt 6 times. That hurt him so much, that reality check. But he also wasn't able to understand that she was allowing for inflation with that number. So she was describing a number that is relevant now, but he couldn't make that connection or equation in his mind. So he said it was far less than that. Well, yeah, it was, by today's money. And so I thought that was an interesting expose as well of him failing to understand the example she was making of him.
Well, he will grab onto anything that will affirm his worldview. Most of us modify our worldview based on facts and reality, but he does the opposite. He has a certain view of himself, and he will fudge facts or grab onto any conspiracy theory that will help buttress his desired worldview. And that's why so many of his followers come up with conspiracy theories. I've said before that he is leading the media and the direction of disinformation rather than the other way around, because people recognize that they can gain favor, they can gain popularity, automatic viewership by meeting his emotional needs and providing him with the information that he can make use of to buttress his own sense of self and desired world view.
He's so easy to manipulate, is what you're saying. It doesn't take a spy to know how to handle this guy. Is that you only have to compliment him a little bit, tell him that you're a huge fan, maybe mention an episode of The Apprentice that you'd seen that you particularly liked, and then you've got him eating out the palm of your hand. That's
right. I think Kamala Harris said at one point that the dictators would just eat him for lunch.
That's right.
And which is true. But the problem is, it's only the nefarious actors who have figured out his psychology and are making use of his weaknesses for unethical and illegal ends. Whereas because we haven't been able to hear from mental health experts in a public setting, that the population that really wishes to manage his psychological symptoms in a way that would keep us safe, that would benefit us, are not becoming known. In fact, I've said from the very beginning that Donald Trump is the kind of person you could convince to resign from the presidency right away. In fact, there were many opportune moments. Most people respond in disbelief when they hear this, but Well, that's a difference of understanding his psychology versus not. Well, John Kelly, the former White House chief of staff and general, who secretly bought our book, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, and used it, they say, as an owner's manual of how to manage Trump, seems to have avoided a nuclear war with North Korea using the principles that we outlined in the book. So imagine if not just John Kelly, but many people in charge and power would have made use of the knowledge we had. Imagine if the entire American population were protected and inoculated with the information we had. And if the experience of a prosecutor with Kamala Harris benefits her so much in dealing with him, imagine forensic mental health experts who specialize in dealing with the psychology that Donald Trump brings. How different a place we would be in today. And that's been the greatest difficulty and frustration of not being able to have our voices heard in public, which is remedied, very thankfully, thanks to you.
Well, I was going to say that I feel that you kind of answered your own question as to whether or not you should publish the report that you compiled for Judge Mercan, because it is clear to me that transparency in this urgent moment in history is probably going to be the most helpful thing. And, you know, if people understand that a body of mental health experts have drawn these conclusions together, it's very different to just one person with an opinion. And yes, that really is how these, you know, how you make change.
Yes, actually, if mental health experts were not silenced in the media, then you would just hear our consensus. Of course, all kinds of other opinions have the possibility of entering because it's a politically charged issue, but eventually you would hear what is the correct course that we all think of things and the consensus we arrive at, given enough information and discussion. In medical conferences, we usually end up with a conclusion that we can all agree on because the thinking process is quite the same and standardized. Either that or we don't have enough information, but the public would come to know that also. So just knowing that this is a phenomenon that everyone has just been so confused by and suffering from and not being able to gain a handle on was so clearly transparent to us and predictable and preventable is the part that is quite difficult. Just like the COVID-19 pandemic. We did not have to have the world's greatest number of deaths, and we did not have to be the epicenter of the pandemic, especially when we had the greatest concentration of knowledge. But just as during the pandemic, when Donald Trump suppressed expertise or denigrated them, discredited them, had half the population not following protocols, it just allowed it to spread rampantly. And it's the same with what I've been calling a mental health pandemic, that is Trump contagion. It could have been contained so much earlier and could have spared a nation of incredible levels of suffering and allowed us to get to a much higher level where we would be solving the world's problems, not trying to avert another existential threat.
Yeah. Well, his response was, "It is what it is." And, you know, that is not good enough for a commander-in-chief. We have to finish, but I'm so grateful to you for your analysis, and I wish you luck with the original book, the new book, and the conference that you're planning as well. If you'd like to find out more about Dr. Bandy Lee, you can visit bandylee.com. There's a link below in the description. For now, Bandy Lee, thank you for joining the Weekend Show.
Thank you once again for having me.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism at patreon.com/5 Minute News. See more of me on the 5 Minute News YouTube channel and podcast. And I'll come back next Sunday with more factual news to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.